So to start off by having you say your name.
I'm Dennis J. Hoppe, born and raised here in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay, and then
Drafted
yeah.
in January of 1966, close to the height of the Vietnam War. Did my basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and from there I went to Fort Hood, Texas for advanced training in armor. I was a turret mechanic on tanks for the 2nd Armored Division. Except the push in Vietnam got so high, they cut orders for us to go overseas as artillery people, which meant I was in a 105 towed howitzer group, which consists of 3 batteries, A, B, and C. I was at C battery, which is 6 howitzers, which are 105 millimeter cannons. I knocked the movie over. Anyway, I was the company armor, and then we were detached, and we trained at Fort Irwin, California, in the Mojave Desert for several months, supposedly to become acclimatized and to make a cohesive working unit. And there was 3 batteries, like I said, ABC. So that's a total of 18 guns. Anyhow, we shipped over on a ship, and it took 20 days to get there. And then we unloaded, and then we were assigned to a base camp for 2 weeks just to get some information about the country and what our responsibilities would be.
Okay, so I'll start you out with the first question. So I know you're drafted. So how was that kind of experience being drafted? Finding out you were being drafted into the war.
Into the war. When you get drafted, you are drafted into the armed forces of the United States of America. That's the way it's written. What I didn't realize was I thought when you got drafted, you went in the Army. And so when we got to Minneapolis for the induction, we were sitting in folding chairs in rows of, there must have been 45 of us or better, and they made us count off 1, 2, 3, all the way down the line. After we were inducted into the armed forces of the United States, the first 22 people were called to stand up, and they went to the Marine Corps. First time in the history of the United States Marines they drafted people. And that's because Vietnam was becoming very heated. The next, I think I was number 24, 27, and so 30 of us went to the Army, and the other 30 went to the Navy. And that was quite a shock to me because I knew a lot of guys in the front row. A lot of them never came back because the Marines were Northern Vietnam service rather than where I was with the South Vietnamese Army. So that was a real big eye-opener.
Okay, then I'll continue by asking, after being drafted, you continued on to going to training, and from...
We had advanced individual training. Like I say, I wasn't trained initially for Vietnam or for infantry service. I was artillery. So I was what was called third echelon maintenance. I was supposed to repair tanks, the turret guns and the armor on the tanks. What happened was Vietnam got heated up so bad they pulled me out of there and they sent me to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland, where I learned about howitzers, cannons, tanks, all of the equipment. And then from there I was sent to California for shipment overseas.
Okay, so like during the training, what were your thoughts going on before actually being
shipped over?
Yeah, shipped over to the war.
It was mostly educational. You had to pass these tests, and it was just like school. You did the best you could because what else are you going to do? You're in the Army. You do what you got to do. So we cross-trained with other people from, I can't remember the country now, Jordan. I had 2 classmates that were from Jordan, And so they sat on either side of me because I spoke more English than some of the guys. Anyway, it was a hell of a learning curve because you had to understand these weapons because you're going to go overseas to work on them. And so that was the big to-do there. And then the rest is just repetition. We had to fire them, take them apart, put them back together, and fire them again to make sure you didn't do it wrong.
Okay, so then as soldiers there, fighting in the war, were there many bonds and many like relationships formed, or were there like many hates, like kind of like hateful relationships between different divisions, or
not so much divisions, individuals. You're always going to have people you like and people you may not like. But in that situation, you have to work together. And it was it was not a popular war, if you can call it a war. They called it an action, but no, people-wise, each unit, different groups within the unit formed good bonds. The gun people were good. That's the ones that are in charge of each howitzer. We had a communications group, and of course, most of those, not as a sidebar, were from Puerto Rico. They would draft into the Army or join the Army, and at the end of their service, they could apply for citizenship. So we had a lot of them, and most of them were bilingual, and that was the hardest part, was working with them, was they're talking to each other in Spanish or whatever, and it was hard sometimes to communicate. But that was the worst. And no, as far as bonds, whoever you were attached to, if you went out on a field maneuver, you knew you had each other's back. And there was no doubt about it, because you might not make it otherwise. So.
Okay, and then kind of advancing the thought of the war, what was one of your most memorable moments, or one of the most kind of reoccurring events that goes through your mind about the Vietnam War?
Reoccurring events.
Well,
I know.
Anything that you really just can't like forget.
Let go. There are a lot of instances, but I think the worst that I won't let go is you go from Vietnam, they put you on a plane and bring you home, and you process out of Travis Air Force Base in California in 24 hours. They put you in a new uniform and sign 42,000 pages of paper, and then you get on an airplane to come home. And people don't, even I didn't understand. When you come out of the jungle after, I was on the front line until I had 10 days left in the Army when they finally caught up to me to send me home. So you're in the field, and now you're home. And at night, you'd have nightmares. It could have been the smell of the rain. It could have been the arc lights were a real problem in the neighborhood. Then sometime, you'd have a nightmare and you'd be flailing around, and my bed was up against the wall and I'd be banging on the wall, not realizing it. And my mother came in one night and made the mistake of waking me up. And by the time my dad got up and got in there, I had her up against the wall and was choking her. And that is my worst nightmare.
It's your worst nightmare?
Yep.
Okay. So kind of going along the lines of like going back to the being a civilian in the United States, how was that transition, trying to become just a normal citizen?
The transition was hard because, like I said, it was an unpopular war, and I thought I wanted to go to school, and as a vet, when you went to apply at the university, you had I can't remember, we'll call it a green card or a yellow card, and that's where you would go to look up classes, and everybody that was there that was against the war, which I didn't realize, knew that green card meant you were a vet. And if you'd ask somebody, how do you get to this building, they'd send you the other way. So after I made an attempt for 2 days, came home and told my dad, I said, that's it. I'm not going. And it was the attitude of most of the people against the war. And after I got home and settled down and was planning on getting married, even then, that was 1970 when I got married. Sometime prior to my wedding, Carol, your aunt, came over to my house, and I was in the backyard trimming the bushes. And anyway, I damn near knocked her out because she came up behind me and startled me so bad. And it's just a reflex thing, and it took a couple of years to get through that phase of it. But as far as the war goes, I understood the protesters to a degree. I didn't choose to go to Vietnam. I was sent there by the government. I was fulfilling my obligation as a citizen of the United States.
Okay.
But it was hard to choke down because during that time it was the first war that was really filmed heavily.
Yeah.
And news wise where you saw them. And I felt just about as bad for the Vietnamese people as our own troops.
Okay.
So it was an adjustment.
Okay, well, thank you. And that'll wrap up this interview.